She fell asleep on the Vampire King's shoulder during the train ride. What he did next changed her life forever. The train's rhythmic clatter against the rails had become almost hypnotic as Maya pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the dark countryside blur past. The overnight express from Prague to Vienna was nearly empty, just a handful of passengers scattered throughout the dimly lit carriages, each lost in their own world of exhaustion or contemplation. She hadn't planned to take this route. In fact, nothing about the past 72 hours had gone according to plan. The archaeological conference she'd travelled halfway across the world to attend had been abruptly cancelled due to what officials vaguely described as unforeseen circumstances. Her hotel had double-booked her room. Her wallet had been stolen from a cafe while she'd foolishly left it on the table. And now she was travelling on an emergency visa with nothing but her passport, a small backpack, and the equivalent of €40 that had been tucked in her jacket pocket. At 28, Maya had thought she'd outgrown the chaos that seemed to follow her through her early 20s. She'd earned her doctorate, secured a position at a respected university, and had finally started to feel like an adult with her life together. 3 days in Europe had thoroughly demolished that illusion. The train car lurched slightly as it rounded a bend, and Maya's eyelids grew heavier. She'd been awake for nearly 36 hours, having spent the previous night in the Prague train station after discovering she couldn't afford even the cheapest hostel. The hard plastic bench had left her back aching and her neck stiff, but at least she'd been safe, surrounded by other travellers and station security. This train, however, felt different. There was something unsettling about the quality of silence between the mechanical sounds, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up despite her exhaustion. She glanced around the compartment. An elderly woman sat 3 rows ahead, knitting something with deep burgundy yarn, her needles clicking in time with the train's rhythm. Across the aisle and 2 rows back, a businessman in an expensive suit worked on a laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. And then there was the man who had boarded at the last stop. He sat directly across from her, and Maya had been trying very hard not to stare at him for the past 20 minutes. Everything about him seemed designed to draw attention while simultaneously warning people to keep their distance. He was tall. She'd noticed that immediately when he ducked slightly to enter the train car, with the kind of aristocratic features that belonged in a museum portrait rather than on a modern passenger train. His hair was dark, almost black, worn longer than current fashion, but not quite long enough to be deliberately rebellious. His clothes were immaculate, a black coat that probably cost more than her monthly salary, a deep crimson shirt, and boots that looked both expensive and well-worn. But it was his eyes that had made her breath catch when he'd first glanced in her direction. They were such a pale grey they appeared almost silver in the dim lighting, with an intensity that suggested he saw far more than he should. He hadn't spoken a word since boarding. He simply sat with perfect posture, his hands folded in his lap, staring at something in the middle distance that only he could see. He hadn't pulled out a phone or a book or done any of the usual things people did to occupy themselves during a journey. He just existed with an otherworldly stillness that made Maya deeply uncomfortable. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You're overtired and paranoid. He's just another passenger." Still, when his eyes had met hers briefly as he'd taken his seat, she'd felt a jolt of something, recognition maybe, though that was impossible. She'd never seen this man before in her life. She would have remembered. The train plunged into a tunnel, and the windows became mirrors reflecting the interior of the car. Maya caught sight of her own reflection and winced. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had long since given up any pretense of style. Her olive skin looked sallow in the artificial light, and the shadows under her brown eyes could have been mistaken for bruises. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman at the absolute end of her rope. When they emerged from the tunnel, she found the mysterious man looking directly at her. "Forgive me," he said, his voice low and cultured with an accent she couldn't quite place, something Eastern European but refined, like he'd learned English from BBC broadcasts. "But you seem unwell. Is there anything I can do to assist you?" Maya's first instinct was to refuse. Stranger danger and all that, especially handsome male strangers on mostly empty trains in the middle of the night. But something in his expression wasn't predatory. If anything, he looked genuinely concerned, his pale eyes searching her face with an almost clinical assessment. "I'm just tired," she said, then added, because her filter had apparently shut down along with her energy reserves, "and broke, and my life is basically a disaster right now, but thanks for asking." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. The overnight express from Prague. Yes, this particular route does seem to attract those experiencing transitional moments in their lives. Is that a polite way of saying it attracts disasters and weirdos? I would never be so crude. This time he did smile just slightly, and Maya felt that strange jolt again. Though I have observed over the years that this train carries more than its share of people running from something or toward something else. Which are you? It was an oddly personal question from a stranger, but Maya was too exhausted to care about social niceties. Both, neither, I don't even know anymore. I came here for work, everything went catastrophically wrong, and now I'm just trying to get to Vienna where my return flight leaves in 2 days. After that I can go home and pretend this entire trip never happened. Where is home? Seattle, well, technically Olympia, but close enough. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. A long way to come for disappointment. You have no idea. Maya leaned back in her seat, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. There was something oddly comforting about talking to a complete stranger she'd never see again. What about you? Business or pleasure? Neither. I'm returning home after an extended absence. How extended? Quite. Maya waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She found herself studying him more openly now, noting details she'd missed before. His skin was pale, not sickly, but the kind of pale that suggested he spent very little time in direct sunlight. His fingers were long and elegant, the kind that should belong to a concert pianist or a surgeon. There was a ring on his right hand, a heavy silver thing set with a dark red stone that looked like a ruby but was probably glass. You should rest, he said quietly. You're exhausted and fighting it will only make it worse. We won't arrive in Vienna for another 4 hours. I can't sleep on trains. I've tried before, I'm too anxious. You're afraid. It wasn't a question and Maya bristled slightly. I'm cautious, there's a difference. Of course, he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. But your caution won't serve you well if you collapse from exhaustion. I give you my word that no harm will come to you while you sleep. I'll ensure it. Maya let out a surprised laugh. That's either the sweetest thing a stranger has ever said to me or the creepiest. I honestly can't tell which. Perhaps both. He shifted slightly, angling himself toward the window and away from her. But the offer stands. Sleep if you can. I'll wake you before we arrive. She shouldn't. Every self-preservation instinct she possessed was screaming at her to stay awake and alert. But her body was staging a rebellion, her eyelids growing impossibly heavy, her thoughts beginning to blur at the edges. I don't even know your name, she mumbled. You may call me Dante. Like the poet. Something like that. Maya wanted to ask more, but the exhaustion was pulling her under like a riptide. The train's movement had become soothing rather than unsettling, and despite everything, she felt oddly safe. Maybe it was Dante's strange, formal promise. Maybe it was just that she'd reached the point where her body was shutting down whether she liked it or not. Her head began to droop. The last thing she remembered with any clarity was the sensation of falling sideways, of something solid and cool catching her, of a voice that seemed to come from very far away saying words in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood on a level deeper than consciousness. When Maya's head came to rest on Dante's shoulder, he went absolutely still. It had been 247 years since he'd had a human this close to him without the intent to feed. 247 years since he'd allowed himself to be touched with such casual, unconscious trust. The weight of her head against his shoulder was slight. She was a small woman, built lean and compact, but it felt like the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on him. He could hear her heartbeat, steady and strong, could smell the blood flowing just beneath the surface of her skin, rich with the scent of her exhaustion and stress and something else, something that had made him notice her the moment he'd entered the train car. She smelled of magic, Old magic, the kind that had been dormant for so long it had almost forgotten itself. But it was there, woven into her very essence like gold thread through dark fabric. Dante had boarded this train because he'd felt a pull, a summons of sorts. For months, something had been calling him back to the world he'd left behind, drawing him out of the self-imposed exile he'd maintained in the remote corners of Romania. He'd resisted at first, comfortable in his solitude, but the pull had grown stronger, more insistent, until he could no longer ignore it. He'd expected to find another vampire, perhaps one of the old families seeking his counsel or his power. He'd expected politics or threats or the same tedious games he'd played for centuries. He had not expected to find her. The elderly woman with the knitting needles looked up, and her eyes, ancient and knowing, met his. She smiled, her teeth still sharp despite her human disguise, and nodded once before returning to her work. A witness, then. The vampire elders had placed a watcher on this train, which meant they'd known something was going to happen. Dante felt a flash of anger at the manipulation, but it died quickly. He'd been manipulating events for too long to be truly offended when the same tactics were used on him. The businessman closed his laptop with a soft click and stood, moving toward Dante's row with the fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. A werewolf, Dante noted, from one of the Alpine packs based on his scent. "Your Majesty," the man said quietly, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. "The council wishes you to know that the woman is under protection. No harm must come to her." "I am no longer king," Dante said, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking Maya. "I abdicated that throne a very long time ago." "You abdicated the responsibility of ruling. You did not abdicate what you are, and what you are is needed now." The werewolf glanced at Maya, his expression softening slightly. "She's the anchor, the one the prophecies spoke of. We've been searching for her for 3 decades. Dante's hand tightened slightly on the armrest. "The prophecies are myths, stories we tell ourselves to pretend there's meaning in the chaos." "You don't believe that, not really, not when you can feel what she is, what she carries inside her." He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. From the moment Maya had boarded this train, he'd felt the resonance between them, like a tuning fork struck in an empty room. She was human, yes, but she was also something more, something that called to the oldest parts of him. "What do they want me to do?" Dante asked, though he already knew the answer. "Protect her, guide her, help her become what she needs to be before the convergence." "The convergence is a myth too." "Is it? The barriers have been weakening for years. You felt it even in your isolation. The old things are stirring. The boundaries between worlds are growing thin. If we don't have an anchor when the convergence comes, everything, human, vampire, shifter, all of it, will be torn apart." Dante looked down at the woman sleeping trustingly against his shoulder. She had no idea what she was, what she carried. She was an academic, a woman of science and reason, living a perfectly ordinary human life. And now, because of an accident of birth and blood, she was going to be dragged into a world she didn't know existed. "She deserves a choice," he said. "She'll have one, but first she needs to survive the next 48 hours. There are others looking for her, others who would rather see the convergence happen than prevent it. They'll kill her if they find her." "Then we won't let them find her." The werewolf smiled, satisfied. "The council knew you would say that. Whatever you've told yourself over the centuries, you've never been able to turn away from your true nature." "And what nature is that?" "Protector, king, the shield that stands between the darkness and those who cannot defend themselves." He pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on the empty seat beside Dante. "Instructions and a safe house in Vienna. Everything you need to keep her alive until she can be properly awakened and trained." "You presume I'll cooperate?" "You already are, Your Majesty. The moment you let her sleep on your shoulder instead of moving away, you made your choice." The werewolf returned to his seat, and within moments the businessman's face had returned to something ordinary, just another tired traveler on a late-night train. Dante sat in the darkness, feeling the steady rhythm of Maya's breathing, the warmth of her body against his side. He'd spent 2.5 centuries avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, refusing to be drawn back into the politics and power plays of the supernatural world. He'd been king once, and it had cost him everything he'd loved. He'd sworn never to let himself care that deeply again. But as he looked down at Maya's sleeping face, peaceful in a way she probably hadn't been in days, he felt something stirring in the empty chambers of his heart. Not love, it was far too soon and too complicated for that, but something, a sense of rightness, of purpose that he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. "You're going to make my existence very complicated, aren't you?" he murmured, so quietly that even she wouldn't have heard if she'd been awake. Outside, the darkness rushed past, and somewhere in the distance, things far older and more dangerous than a vampire king stirred in their ancient slumber, sensing that the pieces were moving into position at last. The game was beginning, whether Dante wanted to play or not. And the stakes had never been higher. Maya woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, and the smell of coffee that was far too good to be hotel quality. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, trying to remember where she was and how she'd gotten there. The last clear memory she had was of boarding the train in Prague, exhausted and defeated. Everything after that was a blur of impressions: a man with silver eyes, the feeling of being carried, a voice speaking to her in a language that sounded like music, and then, nothing. She sat up abruptly, her heart pounding, and took in her surroundings. She was in a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel: high ceilings with ornate moulding, heavy curtains in deep burgundy, furniture that was probably antique and definitely expensive. She was still wearing her clothes from yesterday, though someone had removed her shoes and covered her with a blanket. The door opened, and Dante walked in carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Maya could see him more clearly, and her breath caught slightly. He was even more striking than she'd realized in the dim train car, inhumanly beautiful in a way that made her want to stare and look away at the same time. "Good morning," he said calmly, as if it were perfectly normal for her to be waking up in a strange bedroom in what was presumably his apartment. "You slept for nearly 14 hours. I thought it best not to wake you." "Where am I?" Maya's voice came out rough and she cleared her throat. "What happened? I remember the train and talking to you, and then—" "You fell asleep. When we arrived in Vienna, you didn't wake, even when I tried to rouse you. I couldn't leave you on the train, so I brought you here. My apartment is in the city centre, and you seem to need the rest desperately." It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but something about it felt incomplete. Maya rubbed her temples, trying to clear the fog from her mind. "I don't usually sleep that deeply, and definitely not around strangers." "Perhaps your body knew you were safe." Dante set the tray on a small table near the window. "Coffee. I'm afraid I don't eat breakfast myself, but I had these brought in for you." Maya's stomach growled, answering before she could. She climbed out of bed, hyper-aware of how rumpled she must look, and joined him at the table. The coffee was perfect, rich and strong without being bitter. The pastries were still warm, the kind of quality that suggested an expensive bakery. "Thank you," she said, then added, "This is all really weird, right? I'm not crazy for thinking this is weird." "It's highly irregular," Dante agreed, and she appreciated that he didn't try to pretend otherwise. "But then, your entire situation has been irregular from the start. Tell me, Maya, do you believe in fate?" "I'm a scientist. I believe in cause and effect, probability and bad luck." "And good luck." She considered that, taking another sip of coffee. "I'm not sure yet if waking up in a strange man's apartment counts as good luck or very bad luck." "Strange man," Dante repeated, his mouth quirking slightly. "I suppose that's fair, though we did introduce ourselves on the train. That makes us at least acquaintances, doesn't it?" "Acquaintances don't usually kidnap each other." "I didn't kidnap you, I rescued you, there's a distinction." "Rescued me from what? The train?" Dante's expression grew serious, and he leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling silver eyes. "From something far worse than an uncomfortable night in a train station. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Felt anything strange, as if you were being watched or followed?" Maya's hand froze halfway to her mouth, the pastry forgotten. "How did you—" "Answer the question, please." She set the pastry down carefully. Her heart was racing again, but this time with something that might have been recognition. "For the past 3 weeks, maybe a month. Nothing I could point to specifically, just a feeling, like there were eyes on me even when I was alone. My apartment building's security cameras caught someone in a hood outside my door twice, but they never knocked or tried to get in, and there were these dreams. Tell me about the dreams. I don't see how that's relevant to. Tell me. His voice was gentle but absolutely commanding, and Maya found herself answering before she'd consciously decided to. Strange places, old places, castles and forests and cities that don't exist anymore. And there are people, but they're not quite people, if that makes sense. They have these eyes that reflect light wrong, or teeth that are too sharp, or they move in ways that shouldn't be possible. And in every dream, they're all looking at me, waiting for something. Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. What I'm about to tell you will sound insane. Your scientific mind will rebel against it. But I need you to listen until I've finished, and then you can decide whether you believe me or think I'm mad. Can you do that? Every instinct Maya had was screaming at her to leave, to get out of this apartment, and away from this man who was looking at her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. But she was also curious. It was her greatest strength and her worst weakness, the drive to understand that had led her to archaeology and had kept her asking questions when most people would have been satisfied with surface answers. Okay, she said quietly, I'm listening. Dante stood and walked to the window, his back to her as he spoke. The world you know, the world of science and reason and natural law, is real, but it's not complete. There's another world that exists alongside it, hidden from most humans but no less real. A world of creatures and powers that your ancestors knew about but your modern civilization has forgotten. You're talking about the supernatural. I'm talking about reality. He turned to face her. Vampires, werewolves, witches, the fair folk, demons, all the things your cultures turned into stories and myths. They're real, Maya, we're real, and you're part of it whether you know it or not. Maya laughed, but it came out shaky. Okay, that's ridiculous. You're telling me you're what, a vampire? Should I check for fangs? If you wish. He walked back to the table, and before Maya could process what was happening, he smiled, letting his lips pull back slightly. The fangs were there, longer than canine teeth should be, sharp and very obviously real, not prosthetics, not a trick of the light, real. Maya's chair scraped backward as she stood abruptly. No, that's not. There's a rational explanation. Cosmetic surgery or genetic modification or… Look at me, Maya, really look. Dante's eyes began to change, the silver darkening to something ancient and inhuman. I haven't aged in 247 years. I don't eat, I don't sleep, and I require blood to survive. I am, as you so accurately stated, a vampire. And not just any vampire. Until I abdicated the throne, I was the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. The room spun slightly and Maya gripped the back of the chair for support. This is insane. I'm having a breakdown, that's what this is. The stress finally got to me and I'm having a psychotic break. You're not, your mind is perfectly sound. What you're experiencing is the cognitive dissonance between what you've been taught to believe and what you're being confronted with. It's uncomfortable, but it will pass. Why are you telling me this? If all of this is true, which it's not, but if it were, why tell me? Isn't there supposed to be some kind of secrecy thing? Because you're not just a random human, Maya, you're the anchor. The what? Dante moved to a desk in the corner and pulled out what looked like a very old book, its cover worn leather and its pages yellowed with age. 3,000 years ago, the supernatural world and the human world were one. Magic flowed freely, and humans were aware of the other species that shared the planet with them. But around 1000 BCE, a group of powerful witches created what they called the Veil, a barrier that would separate the worlds, protecting humans from supernatural predators and protecting supernatural beings from human fear and violence. He opened the book to a page covered in symbols Maya didn't recognize, and a drawing that looked like a web of light. The Veil has held for 3 millennia, maintained by magical bloodlines that anchor it to the physical world. These anchors are born randomly throughout history, usually unaware of what they are until their power manifests. You, Maya, are the current generation's anchor. The magical abilities in your bloodline have been dormant for so long that you've lived your entire life as a normal human. But the power is there in your DNA, waiting. Maya sank back into the chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. That's why you were on the train. You knew what I was. Not at first. I felt a pull, a summons I didn't understand. But when I saw you, when I was close to you, I felt the resonance. You're connected to every supernatural being on Earth through the veil, and we're all connected to you, whether we realize it or not. And the people following me, the ones I felt watching me. There are two factions in the supernatural world right now. Those who want to maintain the veil and keep the world separate, and those who want to bring it down. They're called the Convergence. They believe that reuniting the worlds will usher in a new age where supernatural beings rule openly again. And the easiest way to bring down the veil is to kill the anchor before their power fully manifests. The coffee Maya had drunk turned to acid in her stomach. They want to kill me. They would have if they'd found you first. That's why I brought you here to this safe house. It's warded with protections that will hide you from their magic. But Maya, you need to understand, hiding isn't a permanent solution. The Convergence is coming. In 6 weeks on the autumn equinox, the barriers between worlds will be at their thinnest. If your power hasn't fully awakened by then, if you haven't learned to strengthen the veil, everything will collapse. The supernatural world will spill into the human world and the chaos will be. He trailed off, shaking his head. Millions will die, perhaps billions, before any kind of order could be restored. Maya put her head in her hands. This is too much. This is completely insane. I know. I'm an archaeologist. I study dead civilizations. I don't have magic powers, and I certainly don't have whatever it takes to save the world. You have more than you know. You just need to learn how to access it. And you're volunteering to teach me. Why? What do you get out of this? Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. For 2.5 centuries, I've lived in isolation, avoiding the responsibilities of what I am. I've told myself I was done with leadership, done with the games and politics of the supernatural world. But when I saw you on that train, something changed. Maybe it's fate, or maybe it's just that I'm tired of being alone. Either way, I find myself invested in your survival. Maya looked up at him, searching his face for signs of deception. But all she saw was an ancient weariness and something that might have been hope. If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, what happens? We train. I teach you to access your power, to feel the veil and how it connects to you. There are others who will help. Witches, shifters, beings who have been waiting for you to be found. And when the equinox comes, you'll do what only an anchor can do. You'll strengthen the veil and keep the worlds separate. And if I can't, if I'm not strong enough, then we'll face the consequences together. Before Maya could respond, the apartment's lights flickered, and Dante's head snapped toward the window. His entire demeanor changed, his body going tense and predatory in the space of a heartbeat. They found us, he said quietly. Faster than I expected. The wards should have held longer. Who found us? The Convergence. He moved with inhuman speed, pulling her away from the window. We need to leave, now. But you said this place was safe. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Maya screamed as Dante pulled her behind him, and through the shattered window came something out of a nightmare. It was vaguely humanoid but wrong in every way, too tall, too thin, with joints that bent at impossible angles and skin that looked like it had been flayed, and then imperfectly stitched back on. Its eyes were completely black, and when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out was like metal scraping against metal. Demon, Dante said, and his voice had changed, become something that resonated with power and ancient authority. You violate the accords by attacking a protected safe house. The demon's response was a sound that might have been laughter. It lunged forward with horrifying speed, but Dante was faster. He met the creature's attack with his bare hands, and Maya watched in shock as they crashed together with a force that cracked the wooden floor. She should run. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to get out of the apartment and as far away as possible. But she found herself frozen, unable to look away from the battle unfolding in front of her. Dante moved like violence made art, every strike precise and devastating. But the demon was strong, impossibly strong, and for every blow Dante landed, it recovered almost instantly. They were too evenly matched, and Maya realized with dawning horror that Dante might actually lose. Without thinking, she grabbed the first thing her hand touched, a heavy antique candlestick from the desk, and swung it at the demon's head with all her strength. The moment the candlestick connected, something happened. Light exploded from the point of impact, brilliant and golden and alive. The demon shrieked, a sound that made Maya's ears ring, and staggered backward. The light spread from where she'd hit it, racing across its body like fire, and within seconds the creature crumbled to ash. Maya dropped the candlestick, staring at her hands. They were glowing with the same golden light, pulses of it running up her arms like veins of pure energy. Dante turned to her, his eyes wide with something that might have been awe. "Your power, it's manifesting." "What did I do? What is this?" "You just killed a demon that I was struggling to fight. You instinctively accessed the veil's power and channeled it through a blessed object." He took a step toward her, carefully, as if approaching a spooked animal. "Maya, do you understand what this means? You're already connected to your power. With training, with time, you could become stronger than any anchor in recorded history." The light faded from Maya's hands, and the moment it did, her legs gave out. Dante caught her before she hit the ground, his arms surprisingly gentle. "Easy, using that much power when you're untrained will exhaust you. You need to rest." "No time for rest," a new voice said, and Maya looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with white blonde hair and eyes that were too blue to be human. "More are coming. That demon was just a scout. If she killed it, they'll know she's powerful and they'll send everything they have." "Freya," Dante said, and Maya heard respect in his voice. "I didn't expect the wolves to send their alpha. This is too important to delegate. Besides, I wanted to meet the woman who made you feel something again after all these years." The woman, Freya, smiled at Maya. "Hello, Anchor. Welcome to your new life. I hope you're ready because everything's about to get very complicated." Maya looked between Dante and Freya, at the ashes of the demon scattered across the floor, at her own hands that had just channeled impossible power. "I think," she said weakly, "I need to sit down and completely reevaluate my understanding of reality." "Later," Dante said, lifting her easily. "Right now we run." As they fled the apartment, Maya's mind raced. 24 hours ago, her biggest problems had been a cancelled conference and a stolen wallet. Now she was apparently a magical being who was the only thing standing between the world and apocalyptic chaos. She was being hunted by demons, and she'd fallen asleep on a vampire king's shoulder on a train. Her life had definitely taken a turn. She just had to hope she survived long enough to figure out what to do about it. The safe house Freya led them to was nothing like Dante's elegant apartment. It was a basement beneath a closed bookstore in Vienna's old district, accessible only through a door that appeared when Freya touched the wall. The moment they crossed the threshold, Maya felt pressure release from her chest that she hadn't known was there. "Triple wards," Freya explained. "Magic, blood and iron, nothing gets through without permission." The basement was impossibly large, filled with at least a dozen people who looked almost, but not quite, human. A woman with silver eyes stirred a glowing purple cauldron. Two men moved in perfect synchronization near an exit. In the corner sat a figure with pointed ears, reading a disturbing-looking book. "Faye," Dante murmured, "be polite, they hold grudges for centuries." "This is all real," Maya whispered, her voice shaking. The silver-eyed woman approached with a steaming mug. "Drink this. It'll help ground you. I'm Sarah, I've been tracking your bloodline for 15 years. Maya drank. The liquid tasted like honey and starlight, and clarity flooded back. "My bloodline. Your great-great-grandmother was the last anchor in your family, back in 1847. The power skips generations. Your ancestors learned to hide it, to pretend it didn't exist." Freya interrupted, her beautiful face sharp as a blade. "Someone told the Convergence where to find you. The wards on Dante's apartment were council-designed. There's a traitor in the inner circle." "Which means we can't trust anyone outside this room," one of the twins said. Maya's hands tightened on the mug. "You keep talking about this convergence. What exactly happens?" The Fae spoke, their voice musical and eerie. "The barriers between worlds will thin until they break. Entire dimensions of demons and elder things, locked away for 3,000 years, will pour through like water through a dam. They will be hungry. And I'm supposed to stop armies of monsters, alone." "You're not alone," Dante said quietly. On the equinox, you can draw on every supernatural being through the veil, but only if you learn to access that connection, and you have 6 weeks when you should have years. Freya and Sarai exchanged glances. There is one option, Freya said carefully. The unification ritual. It would bind your life force to another supernatural being permanently. You'd share power, strength, everything. Their experience would become yours. You could learn in weeks what normally takes years. What's the catch? Dante's voice was tight. If one dies, both die. Your lives become completely intertwined, emotions, thoughts, dreams, everything shared. Forever, no way to undo it. Everyone carefully avoided looking at Dante. Oh, Maya said softly, you all think Dante and I should do this. He's one of the oldest and most powerful vampires in existence, Sarai said, and he's already chosen to protect you. Maya turned to Dante. What do you think? The decision is yours, he said carefully. But would you agree? Silence stretched between them. Finally, Dante spoke, barely above a whisper. I spent 200 years alone by choice. Binding my existence to another person terrifies me. But watching you face this alone, watching you die because I wasn't willing to take the risk, that terrifies me more. Warmth spread through Maya's chest. So that's a yes. If you choose this path, I will walk it with you. Can I talk to Dante alone? The others left. Maya faced him, seeing past the beauty to the loneliness that matched her own. Tell me the truth, is this really our best option? Yes, he said without hesitation. And after we save the world, then what? We're stuck together forever. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Stuck is such a negative word. I prefer partnered, perhaps even friends given time. Friends who share thoughts and die together. Maya, I've lived for 2.5 centuries, I've experienced everything, and I've never felt what I felt when you fell asleep on my shoulder, like something clicking into place, a missing piece suddenly found. He paused. I've met other anchors, the connection never felt like this. Maya's breath caught, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. What if I'm not strong enough? What if we both die and the world ends anyway? Then at least we face the end together, Dante said simply. I'm tired of being alone. If these are my last 6 weeks, I'd rather spend them fighting alongside someone who makes me feel alive than hiding in isolation. Maya made her decision. Okay, let's do the ritual. The ritual required blood, silver and starlight. Sarai had drawn symbols on the floor in chalk and salt. 5 candles burned around a circle. In the center, a silver bowl filled with water reflected impossible stars. Last chance to back out, Dante said, taking her hand. Maya squeezed back. Let's save the world, Vampire King. They stepped into the circle. Sarai chanted in an ancient language. The Fae sang in impossible harmonics. Freya cut her palm, letting wolf blood fall into the bowl. Blood of the anchor, Sarai instructed. Maya's blood joined Freya's, turning the water crimson. Blood of the binding. Dante added his blood without hesitation. The water glowed, pulsing with Maya's heartbeat. The temperature dropped. Frost formed on the walls. Take her other hand, don't let go no matter what. The moment Dante's second hand touched hers, the world exploded. 247 years of memories flooded through Maya, battles and ballrooms, loves and losses, the weight of a crown and crushing loneliness. And Dante felt her life too, her mother's death, graduate school struggles, every joy and pain that made her who she was. It should have shattered their minds, instead it felt like coming home. Their thoughts aligned, finding harmony. Where she was impulsive, he was careful. Where he was cynical, she was hopeful, 2 halves balancing each other. Golden light rose around them. Maya could see the veil now, a vast web of energy connecting every supernatural being on Earth with her at the center. Through Dante, she understood how to manipulate it, strengthen it, use it. Something locked into place deep in her chest. Their life forces merged, 2 streams becoming one river. When the light faded, everything had changed. Maya felt Dante's presence in her mind like warm light, sensed his emotions as clearly as her own. How do you feel? Freya asked. Like I drank 1,000 cups of coffee and could sleep for a week, Maya said, and I suddenly know 6 languages, which is weird. You have access to his knowledge now, Sarai smiled. Can we stop the convergence? Not yet, you need practice. We have 6 weeks, we'll use every minute. The next 6 weeks blurred together in intense training. Maya learned to consciously access the veil's power, sense weak points between dimensions, draw on supernatural strength. Dante was with her through everything, his presence constant comfort and occasional frustration. But more than training, Maya experienced the world anew. Through the bond, she felt Dante's perspective, sunsets viewed across centuries, coffee tasted through her senses though he couldn't drink it, the simple joy of connection he denied himself. Dante came alive again, ancient weariness lifted, replaced by hope. They learned each other. Maya discovered Dante's suppressed sense of humor and secret love of terrible puns. Dante discovered Maya sang off-key in the shower and feared deep water from a childhood accident. It was strange and wonderful and sometimes uncomfortable, but Maya wouldn't change it. The convergence approached. Maya felt pressure building against the veil like a coming storm. Things began slipping through, minor demons, wisps of magic, warnings of what was coming. 2 more assassination attempts failed. The bond made Maya too strong, and Dante, drawing on their shared power, became more dangerous than he'd been in centuries. Finally, the autumn equinox arrived. They gathered at an ancient stone circle in the Austrian Alps. Hundreds of supernatural beings assembled, answering the anchor's call. Maya stood in the center as the sun set, Dante beside her. The barriers thinned until she could see through to the other side. Armies of demons and elder things pressed against the veil like locusts, hungry for fresh worlds. Ready? Dante asked softly. Through the bond, Maya felt his absolute confidence. No, but I'm doing this anyway. She reached through the veil, connecting to every supernatural being assembled. Vampires and werewolves, witches and fae, shapeshifters and spirits, all became extensions of herself, power flowing like rivers into an ocean. Then she pulled on Dante, drawing on his centuries of strength. Golden light exploded outward, brighter than the sun, racing along the veil's web. She felt every weak point and poured power into them, reinforcing what had weakened. Demons screamed in rage, throwing themselves against the barriers before it was too late. Maya gritted her teeth and held firm. Power flooded through her, almost too much to handle. She felt like burning from the inside. But Dante was there, steady and unshakable. He took some of the burden, sharing the pain. Through him, she felt other supernatural beings doing the same, all working together. The veil blazed with golden light. Demons' screams grew distant. The barrier solidified, stronger than they'd been in centuries. Maya poured her last strength into sealing the final weak points. Then the light faded and she collapsed. Dante caught her. Through the bond, she felt his pride, relief, and something like love. You did it, the veil is stable. The convergence is prevented. Maya smiled weakly. We did it, I couldn't have done it alone. Around them, supernatural beings cheered. The crisis was averted, both worlds saved. As Dante helped her up, Maya looked at the faces surrounding them. Vampire, werewolf, witch, fae, all celebrating together. This was her world now. Not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd chosen. So what happens now? She asked. I don't think either of us can go back to who we were, Dante said, still holding her hand. But we can decide who we want to become, together. Through the bond, Maya felt his unspoken question, an offer of something beyond partnership. Are you asking me on a date? She said with a slight smile. I'm asking if you'd like to explore what this bond could become beyond magical necessity, just possibilities. Maya thought for exactly 3 seconds. I fell asleep on your shoulder on a train and it changed my life. I think I'd like to see what else is possible. Dante's smile was radiant. Through the bond, Maya felt joy matching her own. The veil was safe. The worlds were saved. And Maya had found what she'd been looking for without knowing it. A place to belong, a purpose that mattered, and someone who understood her completely. As the sun set and stars appeared, Maya leaned against Dante's shoulder, an echo of that first train moment, and marveled at how strange life could be. She'd come to Europe for a conference and found a hidden world. She'd been broken down by misfortune and built back up by magic. She'd faced demons and the potential end of reality. And somehow she'd come out stronger. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing to protect me, for binding your life to mine, for everything." "Thank you for falling asleep on my shoulder," he replied with gentle humor, "and for being brave enough to accept a world that made no sense, and for saving us all." They stood together as celebrations continued, two beings bound by magic and choice. The future stretched before them, full of unknowns but rich with possibility. Maya felt the veil humming contentedly in her consciousness, stable and strong. The two worlds would remain separate, protected by the barrier she'd reinforced. And she would be there, the anchor, keeping watch. It was a responsibility she hadn't asked for, and a destiny she'd never imagined. But looking at Dante, feeling his presence warm in her mind, Maya realized it was exactly where she needed to be. The train ride seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 6 weeks. She'd been so lost then, so defeated. Now she was found, now she had purpose. And it had all started because she'd been too exhausted to stay awake, and had fallen asleep on a vampire king's shoulder. Sometimes, Maya thought, the best things came from moments when you stopped trying to control everything and just let yourself trust. She'd fallen asleep on a stranger's shoulder and woken up to a new life. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it.